everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and welcome to the 2025 ChemKnits Chanukah Special Night 8! Every night of Chanukah, I have been dyeing up yarn in different colorways featuring different techniques. But don't worry, tonight is not the last video of this nightly series. We're gonna have 3 more bonus videos to round everything out. But what am I dyeing up tonight? Tonight, I am going to create a yarn lasagna and combine 2 different requests I've had for variations of this technique. But first, what is a yarn lasagna? This is what we call the technique where I layer yarn with dye, work that through, add more yarn and more dye, work that through, more yarn, more dye, etc. This technique works really well if I want to dye every layer the exact same color, and then I can fit a lot more yarn in one pan, which at times could come in super handy for me as a small batch dyer. But you can also add different colors on each layer. And while things do blend, they don't tend to go through every single layer, and so we can end up with some really fun reveals as I peel off the layers to see exactly what happened beneath. I have done this technique using a different rainbow color on every layer in the past. But the 2 requests I got were, one, to swap the order and start with our purple and end with the red, and the other is to do a magenta cyan rainbow versus a red blue. So tonight we're gonna do that magenta cyan rainbow, but we're gonna start with our purple and end with the magenta. Since this is basically the technique I did in 2024 Chanukah and in 2025's Spring Miniskein mini-series, I want to vary things a little bit, and so while we will be layering the rainbow colors, I'm also gonna add black at one end as sort of a fixed color that'll be the same through all of the layers. All of these are Dharma acid dyes, and the colors that I've pulled for our cyan and magenta rainbow are deep magenta, blazing orange, brilliant yellow, emerald green, Caribbean blue, electric violet, and true black. This is giving us a brighter rainbow overall, even though I think we're gonna have some depth from the more cool toned colors when we bring those in. The one other thing I guess I want to remember is that we know the deep magenta strikes really, really fast. We know the Caribbean blue does not, but it's similar to the emerald green in that way. And I feel like that this may help with my inability to really feel the difference between the orange and the red that we had done in the past. But I think that it should go well, and I think that I can fit 1,600 grams of yarn in one pan? Oh my gosh. Wait, I have to think about how I'm gonna do this again. Oh, and as for the black, you'll see what I plan to do in a moment. The black is gonna be a little bit on every layer. We'll still get to see how the rainbow lasagnas, but there'll be a portion of color that is consistent. The yarn we're dyeing today is all 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. Specifically, I'm using Wool to Dye For's Platinum Sock and Platinum DK 10-gram micro skeins, which I mostly have in 100-gram bundles of 10-gram micro skeins. I just realized I miscalculated on this bucket that has some beautiful sun coming in. Maybe I'll stand in the shade or maybe I'll block it. I have 1,300 grams of yarn in here. And so my thought was always, okay, I'll do 300 grams on the bottom layer and then 200 grams on each subsequent layer. That is enough to finish all the mini skeins. What it isn't gonna be enough for is for me to do the full skeins, because last year and this year, I'm dyeing a full 100-gram skein of yarn in each of the colorways, each of the nights. And yeah, I guess I realized that that's just not going to be possible with this one. There's no way to fit it in. I mean, yes, I could add an additional layer of color, but I think that we need to just focus on the mini skeins and let that be what it is. And as for all these minis, they've pre-soaked for about 24 hours. The question is to try to make sure that I have both fingering and DK on each layer. I'll do my best. I'm probably gonna mess that up though. I pre-soaked all the yarn in plain tap water with no acid. Pre-soaking the yarn without acid is really important for the lasagna technique because we don't want the colors to strike too fast. We want to be able to spread each color through not just the layer where it is, but potentially through multiple layers. Here we have my 6-inch deep full-size catering steam pan. That'll be the star today because unlike my 4-inch deep pans, I know I can fit 6 layers of yarn in here. We've done that in the past, and so that's not going to be a problem. And now having 300 grams of yarn on the very first layer also is going to be fine because that's the one layer that I can flip over to add pigment to the other side. And yeah, our plan is to layer yarn and dye, more yarn and more dye, more yarn and more dye, more yarn, more dye, adding water to work things through, and then at the end we'll add acid. And don't worry, we are going to have some yarn mops. The yarn mops are 20-gram mini skeins that are also in platinum stock or DK. And as I add the dyes in, I will be wiping the dyes off of my gloves onto here. And so you may have a bonus skein to unwrap from tonight. But this will mostly be off camera. I used a bunch of different really pigmented zip ties today, knowing that we could end up getting some color transfer onto our yarn, but I didn't worry about that because this is the end that I'm going to add the black to. And so I figured I could use these zip ties that otherwise I really just save for resist dyeing, where they're going to be dyed a dark color and a little bit of transfer isn't a huge deal. But the transfer really is more likely to happen if I let the yarn soak for a long time. I mean, at some point I will declare that these really pigmented zip ties are done for dyeing yarn, and so that's sad. But I have washed all of them in hot water and things like that. It's just over time they do accumulate more pigment than they can handle. I can see a little bit of blue transfer over here as well. Now for this first layer that's going to be our black and purple, I am going to do 300 grams of yarn. Everything else is going to have 200 grams. And so I think my plan is to lay it out like so. And I'm going to want to add some water because I know I said that I could flip the yarn over. But we both want enough water in our yarn so that way I can work the dyes through. But we don't want so much water in here that when I lift up the yarn to flip things over, which I suppose I could do like a micro flip sort of like locally like this for this particular layer, and I guess that would be fine. But we don't want the black dye to transfer to like move through the water over here. So we want to try to keep it as separate as possible. I don't know how much I'm going to do black. It's going to be not quite 50-50, maybe just a portion, but it'll be a little bit more than just a pop. Ooh, it's not what we're going to do today, but one thing we could do sometime is do a pop of color like in the, ooh, should I do that instead? Part of me wants to do this with a stripe of color in the middle and have that be the black and the pop. But we're gonna do what my original plan was. Maybe sometime we'll do 2 different types of rainbows on either side with the pop of black in the middle. But because we had this color transfer here, the plan was to have black. That's what we're gonna go for. And there's no acid in anything. I would say that I've added maybe around 6 cups of water. I'm gonna make sure I have plenty on hand. So we're ready to go. And I'm gonna go put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves so we can get started. Things are going to be more muffled now that I have my mask on, and I also need to remember we're starting with our purple. So I'm going to come over with our electric violet dye, and I'm speckling it on in a very heavy kind of way. It's heavy because I don't want to leave too many dye clumps that could be a pain to deal with later on. I always reclose the container before I go back in. And I'm going to go ahead and work this through. There's a different way you could do this, and sometimes I may choose to do it this way, where I will add the dye and then add all the colors and then work it through after that. But the reason why I'm deciding to do this is both most of the dye in my gloves is now in our yarn, but then I can sort of deal with most of the purple before we head over to our black.
Now I want my gloves to be really, really dry before I grab more. And also the other reason for coming back in and working these colors through before I go and grab the black is that it means that I have a better chance of working the colors through versus if I didn't, I'm breaking up a clump with my fingers. If I didn't try to work it through, then they could sometimes start striking where I've placed them and not move very far. But you can see that how having this water here, it's letting me dissolve these dyes in a very localized environment. And we're not going all the way through, but we're going through pretty well. And on this layer, it's the only one that I'm going to allow myself to do this. I can really try to help those colors go through. I'm wiping my gloved hands on the yarn mop before drying them off to go into another color. And the reason why you want your gloves as dry as possible is that you don't want to introduce moisture into your dyes themselves because that could give you clumps. And so to the best of your ability, you want to use it dry. Now, I'm layering on more and more. True black lives up to its name. It does not break. It does not have any other colors in there. There are other black acid dyes that do break, that do give you little bits of other colors. And so it's always worth keeping that in mind. I am going to want to add more, but I'm trying very hard to keep things very locally situated. Now, one thing I've loved over the years about the lasagna technique is that it's really good for getting coverage of your colors on multiple layers. But what I'm going to do here is attempt to flip things over. And it's only going to be a little bit tricky because on this stack I have, instead of having 100 grams of yarn, I have two 50-gram bundles. And so maybe some of the black moves down, but also maybe not much. And so now I am going to want to work through more color before we prepare to move on up. So I added on more electric violet dye, worked that through, and on the other end added on more of the true black dye and also worked that through. Okay, that is pretty well sorted. Things are more pigmented than they look on camera. But the last thing I want to do now is before we add our next layer, I'm going to go into our black and sprinkle some black dye on. The next color I'm going to want to be really careful because it's our blue. I don't want to overdo it. Oh goodness. And this is going to introduce some more pigmented color onto the mop, which is totally fine. The mops are going to have so much black on them. But I'm going to take some of our electric violet, and not as much as I had before, but I'm adding some. This way any yarn that's sort of trapped on the bottom will get some pigment, and it'll also just like help work it through, which should be nice. Now I may end up needing to grab some more mops just to show we got a lot of color on there already. Okay, and let me go and grab our next bundle of yarn. Okay, well, the good news is that we've got mostly the one color on one side, but we can add that in. We can spread it out more as needed. But now we'll be able to spread the yarn out into a thinner layer than what we had previously. And you can see some of that color is coming through already. We can add a little bit more water on. But the other thing I want you to note is while, yes, we have some color coming up, it is less pigmented, even without acid, than what we had down below. And remember when we flipped the yarn over on our last round, when we went through that whole process, there was lightness beneath it, so the colors aren't going all the way through each layer. But now we need to carry on and do the next layer. And I'm going to turn this into a time lapse and come back with observations for each color, just because that'll be a little bit easier for me to process.
As soon as I added some Caribbean blue onto the little bit of purple that was there, the color shifted. And I knew that I was not going to need to add much more of this color. Whereas the purple, I felt a need to build it up a little bit more. So I added just a hint of the blue before our green layer, the other super spreader that we have to worry about. And it's also a very pigmented color, so I knew I was not going to need to use nearly as much as, say, the purple, or maybe colors like the orange coming up. But between each layer, I still did add a little bit of dye powder to help bring that color up and through. It is so interesting to me as I press down on the layers to work colors through, both how little color comes up and how much is striking already, but also conceivably how little each color I'm adding goes through all the layers. Although I suppose that is a possibility. Now, adding the yellow did give us a very green color, as expected. So I went a little bit heavier with the yellow, knowing that this is the color that always will disappear, right? But I was really happy once I transitioned into the blazing orange to see that we were actually seeing something that felt more orange. Yes, it was very fall, it was more muted, less bright, sort of muddier, but we were transitioning back into those like warmer tones from the green. I did add a lot more orange, or at least it felt like I did. Something about that color just needs a little bit more to have the same amount of punch as some of the other colors. And that brings us to the final layer, our deep magenta. And this is the layer I was super excited about because we were gonna layer this magenta on top of an orange that was a little bit muted, a little bit dusty, but check out that gorgeous red we got. Oh my gosh. And we know from color mixing that a deep magenta, when you add a little bit of yellow to it, will bring you into a red family. And so I had hoped that this would bring us a red, because if we had brought in a red, there is, I mean, the red is probably a primary color, but there is some yellow that is part of that. In terms of like the color value, I don't know how to describe it. But there's more yellow in a red than there is in a magenta, is I guess the way you would compare the two colors. And so having the red on top of the orange brings you into a more orange place. But going with a magenta, which is more cool toned on top of the orange, brought us this lovely deep red that I am so excited for. Now, as I've gone through this voiceover, I haven't commented on the black side very much. I did my best over there. It's always hard when you're working around zip ties, but that's one reason why I had that color over there. I'm sure there's areas that are gonna feel more gray, but I'm excited to have something that will definitely be variegated in our final result, and not just from the shifts of tone. I wanted something that would feel different from the miniskein you got last year. But the fun thing about all this is that if you got multiple Chanukah samplers, you're likely to get multiple different colors, because I would say each layer had both fingering and DK weight yarn. I don't know how long assembling this entire lasagna took me, but it did take a little while, and my back is tired, I will be honest. We still need to add acid, and we still need to add more water volume, and I'm debating if I want to wait. We did wait at least 5 minutes while I did like a bunch of voiceovers, but I think I'll put the gloves back on and come in and add sort of more liquid. But here are our yarn mops. Aren't they just absolutely gorgeous? There's very little yellow, orange, or red in here, mainly because of the pink at the end that was never really on my fingertips to go onto the yarn mop. But the other colors sort of got overtaken by green so much that we feel more of those green notes in there. And so I'm obsessed with those mops. But I definitely appreciate your understanding as I did this as mostly a voiceover and time lapse versus real time, just because like a lot of effort goes in and it's gonna make the editing way better. All right, let's start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tablespoons of white vinegar. I have not kept track of how much water I have added, but it seems like this is a good amount of acid. Now, as I push the yarn down and let it soak up, I can't tell you how well the acid is moving down to those bottom layers. Eventually we're gonna add more water, and so then I'm gonna know that things are mixing a little bit better. But for now, you know, some of the water is gonna go down to the bottom because I am attempting to really work things through, but I also don't wanna bring the black that far down. So those are the things I am dealing with. And over time, I will also need to add acid into our yarn mops because there was no acid in there yet. But we can deal with that later on. For now, I think I'm gonna let this sit for a little bit. And I don't know how long that is. Maybe, let's check back in after 15 minutes. It's been over 15 minutes, and let's see. I mean, I'm using a blue spoon. There's still a fair amount of pigment in here, which is fine. It's fine. Okay, what I'm going to do, because I want there to be more liquid in here before I start heating things up, I'm gonna add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more tablespoons of white vinegar. And we're gonna add some water. I'm always adding the water onto this end because that is the side where, like, if the red goes onto the darker side, we're okay. But actually, when I push my gloves in, you can see that there is not that much pigment down there anymore. We just don't want anything to burn, you know? Oh gosh, so now I'm gonna need to super carefully transfer things over to the stove. And I don't wanna knock over any water or anything in the process. I've already cleaned off the top edges of the pan. Oh my gosh. We're heavy, not that bad. And the stove is really close. So I'll see you in a minute. In the meantime, here are our yarn mops, and they are so pretty. I'm gonna do 1, 2 tablespoons of white vinegar and just squeeze. I know this is gonna move some of the colors around, but surprisingly, a lot of the color is in place from where I've put it. I just wanna work that vinegar through a bit. And I will go ahead and steam this for 30 minutes, then I'll remove it from the steamer basket, set it aside to cool, and wash it off camera. But we'll show you what it looks like in the end, of course. Getting the camera angle for this was a little awkward because everything is so high up. But I'm across 2 gas burners on my stove, and I'm gonna have them on high for like 2 minutes before bringing it down to low. And the reason for really slowly heating things up is that I don't know how compressed things are on the bottom, and I don't want anything to burn. So I'm gonna reduce the heat to low. It's gonna take a long time to heat up. I'll be checking back in 30 minutes, but it's gonna take a long, long time. And we just have to be okay with that. Yeah, and in a little while, I'll probably be able to add more acid, and that'll be great. But I'll see you in a bit, and we'll come back and check in. It's been 20 minutes or so, and we're starting to, ooh, I see some of what's beneath. Starting to get warmer. I still see a lot of black dye over here. Okay, I am gonna add more liquid, not because I want any colors to move backwards, but it means that, like, the more liquid and things we add, the less compressed things are. Because you can see we can move things and our yarn is still up at the surface. So I could probably add more, but let's wait, you know, another 15 minutes before I add more water. I'm briefly turning up the heat higher because I think that these edges, yeah, well, that one's a little warm. The edges are cool, whereas the middle is warmer. And so I'm just trying to distribute the heat a little better. Over time, things will heat up, and that's not going to be a problem. And in fact, I can add, this is just water that I had on hand. And we're gonna hope for the best. Like, I was seeing a little bit of steam here, but I touched the outside edge of the pan and that felt cool to me. And that's not what we want. And so, again, we're gonna be patient. It's been probably about an hour or so, but it's been like really low and I've added more water. And so we're just gonna take it slow because, again, I don't wanna burn the bottom. And okay, see, with it a little hotter, we're seeing some movement. Because like if there's the heat's all here, it will eventually move out. I could cover it, but instead I'm just checking on it every like 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm gonna reduce the heat back to medium low and we will just wait. Finally brought over a silver marker. Okay, that is getting way lighter. That is good. I'm just coming over and like giving stuff, not that I wanna move black down or anything, just giving things a little bit of a lift, right? Now things are getting warm. You can see steam. Is it bad that I still want to add more water? I'm like, we're slowly warming up. I can't help myself. And I have some more acid. We may as well just add that acid down there. Like, I know I'm introducing cold, but it just makes me feel better to have like plenty of water on the edges. Okay. Slow and steady, slow and steady. Oh man. Hey, we're basically clear now. It's been a long time. We got a little bit of color there. All right, this is looking great. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna turn off the heat. It never got that hot. We've remained like just below a boil. We've been steamy for all this time. And it should be okay. I'm hoping, but I just did not want to risk anything getting toasty on the bottom. And so I tried to like shimmy it every so often. Oh my gosh, those like bits of orange peeking up. Ooh, I see some purple. I'm spoilerizing. Okay. All right, we'll be patient. Because now I want to let this cool, not all the way, but enough that I can comfortably handle it so we can then peel back the layers. Which peeling right here, I'm like, this is the least interesting spot. But I'm so excited. Oh, it's the moment of truth. And yeah, I've peeked a little bit. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I mean, can you really blame me? Okay, let's pull off our first layer. Okay, the second layer is looking really similar to the first one right now. I'm seeing a lot of red. I'm like, will I be able to tell what the layers are in the end? That's always the question. Ooh, wait. But we got more orange and green. Just little hints. Ooh, do I need to connect each layer together? Probably. What I'm starting to do is take the zip ties from each layer and just connect it like so. So that way I will have an easier time on the flip. Okay, let's see. Ooh, look at those colors. Like some of it has to do with how the yarn is twisted when you have it in the pan and just like how they combine. Okay, so we're getting all that very fall on top. Let's see. We're getting a lot more green. I feel like this is very, very similar to what we'd had last year. We just have that little bit of black gray in it as well. The green being super duper dominant It's not that surprising. Oh, because, you know, it's also a color that strikes slower, so it was probably easier to move it through. Ooh, we got some elements of purple and blue. That's really pretty. I tried really hard because I knew that the purple got lost in the last time to keep it present. We have some notes of purple. There's some areas that are definitely more teal, but some elements of the purple are there. And the nice thing is that the dye bath is completely clear. We do have a little bit of staining on the bottom of the pan from the black, but that is not bad. A little bit of staining is way better than some scorch. Now, I did see a little bit of powder around the edge, which I'm cleaning off now. Oh, funny, there's a bunch of pink. But this worked so well. So well. And we know that this is the black dye and not a scorch mark because of where it's placed. And scorch marks looks brown. The yarn is not scorched. I promise. Since I layered our yarn and dye all together with no acid, why didn't the colors blend all the way through, giving us a single average color? My first hypothesis is that my tap water is slightly acidic, and I do know that there are some pigments that will start binding to the yarn without me adding any acid. And in fact, from past lasagnas and things I've done, there are colors out there that don't work well with this method. You add them on, and with no acid, you can't really work them through well. And so if you take that fact and combine it with the fact that we don't have a ton of water, each time we add a layer and we're trying to work that dye through, we are filtering it through more and more layers of yarn. And so the thicker our yarn gets, the harder and harder it's going to be to move that color all the way through. And therefore, that could be why we're not getting a complete blend. It's possible if we had more water, and so that way when we were working the colors through, we were dissolving it in more liquid, that maybe we'd be able to help get that through more. But really, that isn't the goal. We do like that we're getting that separation of color. But whenever I'm working the color through, that is continuing to help distribute whatever colors are present in that local environment. And so this technique is really good for dyeing variegated yarn with having minimal white or pastel patches. If you're dyeing the same color on every layer, because each time you're working the color through, that's helping work it through on bottom layers, and there's already some dye underneath, so all those things sort of help everything keep going. But I think that the biggest factor here that really shows that some color is binding even softly a bit without adding acid is when we add our next layer of yarn on and we work that through, the color is lighter than what we had on that previous layer. So already we're not really averaging out the color throughout all of the layers because some of it is staying put. For one little bonus experiment, I decided to take a little bit of each color and mix it all together to see what our average color would be. And I'm doing this in a fast and dirty way. I'm taking little scoops. Each scoop is about 1/32 of a teaspoon, and I'm adding it to a cup and then dissolving that with water. And then I took that with 200 grams of yarn to dye and see what on earth would happen. And of course, I was wearing my respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves. The reason why I'm calling this quick and dirty is that it would be hard to replicate the color we get in the end because I'm measuring the dyes with volume instead of weighing them out. But since I want just a tiny bit of each color, if I were to go and weigh them out, it would be hard to be precise there anyway, and it would take longer, and this just works. I heat everything up in a pot, added some acid, and let it heat for 30 minutes. And I had no idea what kind of color I was going to get because I feel like I've maybe done this combination for a rainbow before, but I don't think that I've done it with a magenta and cyan rainbow. So I was very excited to see the results. I knew that the orange and the yellow weren't going to have a big impact on the overall color, but I was surprised it was a green. Averages tend to be more purple a lot of the times. This is a really pretty and neutral green. And I'm really curious to see this next to our lasagnas. Okay, we're gonna watch 300 grams that was with this first layer. And it's amazing to just see how colors sort of evolve from what was above it on one hand, but also just was what was from beneath. Because as we added on each layer, we saw how the colors shift. Like adding the yellow, making it like a different green, and then adding that pink and having it turn so red. And I just really enjoy that element of everything so much. But then you get a different surprise when you remove it, because we saw the color shift when I added the blue, but we didn't know how much of like the purple areas were going to be left, and I did try to work it through really, really well. Oh, and we want to make sure we really submerge those zip ties, because they could have had dye on them. But the really nice thing about all of this is that there's no white left behind, right? We got coverage all over the yarn, which is why if I do this technique on just a variegated yarn, where I have each section be a different color, that's why that this can work so well. Because even though the dye doesn't go through all the layers and mix completely, working it through helps sort of even out the coverage as we go, and that's pretty darn fun. And the nice thing is that I'm not seeing any color bleeding yet. There was maybe a hint at the beginning, but that resolved. But let's get some more yarn. This time I have 400 grams, and it's the next 2 layers. And the ones where I added the blue, which is a bleeder, and I added the green, which is another bleeder. So our 2 biggest bleeders, and I'm seeing like a hint of something, but nothing that concerns me. Now, we could have some undissolved dye powder on the yarn, because even though we were working the colors through, the way we had everything grouped, that can happen. It's not something I'm like insanely worried about, but it's worth keeping in mind. But yeah, if I don't have bleeding here, then I'm not going to expect any from our more yellow, orange, and pink layers. I mean, like the tiniest hint, but for 400 grams of yarn, that is nothing. So I'm going to finish washing the rest of the yarn off camera. Then I'm going to put the yarn through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and we'll take a look at this yarn and compare it to the overall average color. This is so pretty. And I know we've made a couple different changes from the last time I did a rainbow lasagna for the spring miniskein mini series. And that is, I used Caribbean blue instead of sapphire blue, which is a brighter blue than the sapphire. If I wanted to mix a sapphire blue, I would take the cyan and add a little bit of pink to it. And similarly, we used our magenta instead of the fire red. But I think overall, if we ignore the black top half, this progression looks like what we've seen, in that we have this like blended, muted rainbow. There are some elements of gold in here, which is so exciting. It's not just orange, but it works and fits, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Now, our black areas up here definitely read more charcoal gray than like a true black, but I'm not mad about it, because this also is going to give things like a different feel from the version of this I did last Chanukah. And so if you had, you know, a yarn that looked a lot like this last year, it's in that color, it's going to be different. And so that was my goal. You can play around with layering different colors and seeing how they blend, and then also keep something the same. And so there's a lot of fun that you can have with this technique. Now here is sort of our average color of everything. And I would say You know, the area where we had the green is where I feel the most of it. Actually, in the middle. Because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, this color I feel like in these middle 2 sections, which means that the average is kind of in the middle. And I know that that's what you would anticipate, right? But there have been times when, say, we've mixed 3 primary colors together at equal proportions, and it doesn't necessarily give you a neutral in the middle. It might lean a little more green, a little more blue, a little more purple. And so this yarn here is green, but the average in that center, I don't know, it just kind of fits, and I'm very excited about that. Now, we did have another type of yarn mop today. These ones have a lot of gray on them because we have the black on every layer, but then we do have elements of all of these other colors, which is pretty darn fun. Oh, and while we're looking at this average color, if I were to take each of those colors separately and dye some yarn, this skein on the right is what we would end up with. And I just think that that's pretty cool. Because the exact same amount of dye I had here for 200 grams of yarn, on 300 grams I layered each of those colors individually. And it's just always fun to see how, like, using the exact same technical recipe of the colors you measure out, you can get very different results, which I know are obvious. It's all based on the technique, but it's still fun to show. With each of the twisted minis, I held the yarn by the black, so that way it would sort of end up in one place. But you can mostly see our rainbow progression here. And I, again, am so thrilled with how this turned out. And now another really fun thing about today's project is that every single person is gonna end up with a different color. Even if 2 people have within the more blue section of yarn, the colors are probably gonna be a little bit different. And so if you ordered multiple samplers for yourself, I am curious to know if I successfully gave you 2 different colors or not. My goal is to give everyone different colors if you order multiple, just because then you get even more variety. What do I think would happen if I did the lasagna but didn't work any of the colors through until the end? So I layer the yarn and dye powder, but don't ever press to move anything through. I think that we would end up with something that would be patchier. I don't think the colors would go through as far, because also keep in mind, I layer the colors, work them through, and then sometimes add more powder on top of that before the next layer to intensify the color. And so I wouldn't be able to edit the colors where I am if I didn't work it through in between the layers. Which isn't saying this isn't something we shouldn't try someday, but the problem with doing a lot of experiments with this lasagna technique is that it requires a lot of yarn. And so therefore it makes it well suited for something like Chanukah, where I'm dyeing a lot of yarn in one video, but I would also like to play around with it at other times of the year as well, without maybe dyeing, 800 plus grams of yarn that maybe I don't know what I'm gonna do with. But I'm always happy to hear the variations you wanna see me try on this technique or anything else. I pull from your questions and suggestions all the time when I'm dyeing more yarn. And if you have a Chanukah sampler, I'm curious to hear what color you ended up with tonight. I know it's shocking, I didn't keep a purple for myself, I decided to keep a red, even though I dyed more purple, technically, than any of the other colors. Now, speaking of Chanukah yarn, there may still be some 2025 or even 2024 samplers left in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. I'll have a link to it down in the video description. And even though tonight's the 8th night of Chanukah, you may still have some bonus minis that'll come out on nights 9 or 10 of this series. Each of the samplers had 9 wrapped packages, 8 minis that were dyed in one of the main 8 nights, and then a bonus 20 gram miniskein that was one of the bonus skeins or yarn mops dyed in any part of the series. And so that might be why you have a night 9 or 10 in your sampler. And then of course, the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop is filled with hundreds of skeins of ready-to-ship hand-dyed yarn that aren't mysteries, that were featured in videos here on this channel. So when you're working with the yarn, you can go back and watch exactly how I created that yarn, which I think is something that makes everything here extra special. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope you've enjoyed celebrating Hanukkah with me. Tonight might be the last night of Hanukkah, but as I said, the series is going to go on 3 more nights. We have 2 more videos where I'll be dyeing yarn, bonus full skeins of yarn, and then we'll have the behind the scenes vlog where I'll go back and show you everything I couldn't share along the way because I didn't want to provide spoilers. So I filmed it and put it into one video talking about how I ordered the nights, my debates between dyeing yarn in a particular colorway, and more. So please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. This is by far the biggest thing you can do to help support all of the content here. Thank you so much for watching. Happy Hanukkah, and I'll see you tomorrow night.